All right, continuing with our foray into the weekly Torah portions. We're still in the book of Deuteronomy, the last book, fifth book, and this week's Torah portion is called Re'eh. And as we know, the name of each each Torah portion is often related to a word in the first sentence. So let me read the first sentence because there's so much in just this one first sentence, and then we'll go a little bit into some of the messages that come out of that and what we can learn for today. So the word Re'eh means to see, to see. See, I present before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing that you hearken to the commandments of Hashem your God that I command you today, and the curse if you do not hearken to the commandments of Hashem your God and you stray from the path that I command you today to follow gods of others that you did not know. So that's the first little paragraph of this week's Torah portion. And from this, we get the idea, the very fundamental idea of the concept of free will, that we have the capacity to make choices, that we are a creation that doesn't just work against our instincts. We don't just have all these things inputting and then we react certain ways, that we are created in the image of God. And one of the ways in which we're created in the image of God is that we have the capacity to choose, to make choices, to act in certain ways. And there's a lot written about the whole concept of free will and what it means. But some of the key points I'd like to bring out. One of them is that since we hold this as a axiom of who we are as human beings, as creations that are created in the image of God, then we are responsible for the choices that we make, that we freely choose certain things. So I'm not talking, and again, all of our commentators talk about free choice in the moral domain, when we make moral choices, not when we choose which ice cream to eat or we decide what to have for dinner. Those are preferences. Those aren't the choices that this Torah portion is talking about. We're talking about the struggle that goes on within the human being to live to our higher self, to live to our conscience, our higher conscience, to live ideals, to live in the image of God, or to live our lower selves, to live because we're hungry or because we're thirsty or because we crave or lust certain things, and that would be a more animalistic drive that we have within ourselves. So when we go back to the story of Adam and Eve, back in the story of creation, when they desired to eat from the tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what they did was they took into themselves, we learned this from the mystical sources, that they took into themselves the influence that's going to pull us away, the Yetzer Hara, this inclination that takes us away from doing the right thing. So now we are admixture of that. We have, an animal tendencies to want to do things that are more animalistic, and we also have a higher consciousness. We have a soul. We have a breath of God that's breathed into us, that's striving, that's looking to connect to the transcendent, looking to connect to the source of all reality, that's looking to live our higher self. So we have this struggle within ourselves, and we get to choose, and in that choice we grow. So all of our commentators, when they talk about free will, they speak about it in terms of a choice that we make, that we then take credit for, hopefully, if we make the right choices. So if I have before me, as it says in our Torah portion, a blessing or a curse, it seems fairly obvious. You choose the blessing. You choose to do the right thing. But sometimes it's not so clear. Sometimes we're at that point where, as Rabbi Tatz, a lot of this is from Rabbi Tatz, he speaks about this nakuda, this point of free will, where I'm equally balanced. I could go this way, I could go that way. I could choose to say the hurtful thing, or I could choose to hold myself back. I could choose to go visit the sick person, or I could stay home and relax on the couch. I don't know, whatever we put into a moral domain of decision making. Again, it's not what color ice cream, what type of ice cream I choose. It's a decision that we make that's related to a moral domain. Do I eat grapes as I walk around the supermarket without paying for them, or do I hold myself back and pay for them at the other end? Because that would be considered stealing, right? So all of these little choices that we make, they build us, they help us grow, and we're in this world to grow. We're in this world to create ourselves, to make ourselves better, to lift ourselves into the transcendent, to lift ourselves beyond the base, to lift ourselves up from our lower selves, to become more holy, to bring holiness into the world. And what Moses is telling the Jewish people as they're poised on the cusp of going into the land of Israel is to say to them, look, you're not going to be living with these overt miracles anymore. You're not going to see so clearly the hand of God like you saw when you came out of Egypt, or you saw when you were at Mount Sinai, or you saw when the sea split, or you saw when, like what was going on in the desert when the manna came down from heaven. You're not going to see the hand of God so clearly anymore. Don't forget that hand of God. See, it says re'eh, see. Like what can you see? How do you know? Seek it out, search for it, remember it. And it also says that you should remember what happened from, it goes back to when you go forward. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget who your ancestors are. Don't forget what they saw. Don't forget what shoulders that they have created for you to stand on. Right? So when we as the Jewish people today, we are continually remembering our ancestors. We're continually remembering the Exodus from Egypt and Passover every year, etc., etc. We have holidays and Shabbat every week that remind us of the overt miracles, that remind us of God's influence in the world. Right, so we might not see it now, but we are in a post-desert reality, and we're on a journey. We're going somewhere, and we're promised that there will be a third temple, and there will be a resurrection of the dead, and there will be these things in the future. And we're just on this journey. We're just in this interim period. Our lives, our travels, our soul travels through this world, and it's here for a purpose. It's here for a reason. It's here to do something. So when it says re'eh in this week's Torah portion, to see, it's speaking in the singular. You, every single person in this world, is here for a reason. You wake up in the morning because God has faith that you will do what you need to do in this world, that you have the capacity to change the world by what you do. It's in the singular. Each one of us has the potential and the capacity to change the whole world for good. And we're coming up, it's 40 days. Today is, I believe, the 40th day till we get to Rosh Hashanah. It's 40 days till Rosh Hashanah, when we can really work on these concepts and get to Rosh Hashanah, where we recognize God in the world. Jewish people are on their way into the land of Israel. They're not going to see the hand of God as overtly as they did in the desert. And Moses is saying to them, but don't forget where you came from. Don't forget what you experienced, what your parents experienced, what your grandparents experienced. Don't forget that. Take that with you and pass it on. And we're told to take it with us and pass it on, to see God, to look for God, to find God in the singular, because each one of us matters. And then it shifts into the plural, because it's not just for my benefit, it's for the klal, it's for the whole. Like, we are part of an organism called the Jewish people, and everything we do matters in the bigger organism. There's a story told about a man on a boat, and it's a classic story, but I think it really drives this point home. This man's on a boat, and he's sitting on a bench, and he decides he's going to drill a hole under his seat in the boat. So he takes an awl or a drill or something, and then he drills a hole, and he's drilling a hole under his seat, and people start shouting at him, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're like, we're all going to drown if you drill that hole under your seat. And he said, but I'm drilling it under my seat. He said, it doesn't matter, because we're all in the boat together. It matters. We're all one organism. If we lift the organism up, we all benefit. It's going to bring blessing into the world. We talked about this before, but we're talking about it again today. Don't forget the blessings. God's going to give us blessing. He wants to give us blessing. Go back to the fundamental teachings of the Ramchal, the teachings that's the foundation of Jewish thought, which tells us that the reason that the world was created so that God could give good to us. He wants to bestow goodness upon us. He's poised to give us all this goodness, and we have to earn it. We have to do what we need to do in order to receive the blessing. How? By connecting ourselves back to the divine, by bringing that into the world, by being in line with godliness. And that's the choice that we get to make. We get to choose. So the very fundamental notion of free choice is fundamental to who we are as a speaking, thinking, breathing, B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, creations, that we have the capacity to freely choose for a blessing or for curse, for life or for death. What are we going to choose? How are we going to do that? So we do that with our intellect. We do that with our heart. We do that by learning and growing and looking at the world around us and knowing God. We talked about this last week, about how we know that God's in the world. How do we understand that? Do we look at creation, how amazing creation is? And so there has to be a God. Do we look at our lives? Do we count our blessings? Are we grateful for what we have, not for what we don't have? And to see everything as a blessing. So here we are today. And today, it's today. Another one, it says in this week's Torah portion, right at the beginning, that this blessing that you get to choose, and it says that I command you today. And it's today, not just today, back when Moses is telling this to the Jewish people on the verge of going into the land, but it's today now, like our lives. Don't forget now. We have to live in the now. And I think during COVID, we're very aware of the fact that we don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. We have no idea. We're in a different place than we thought we would be 6 months ago. Where are we now? We're in a whole different place. Our lives are turned upside down. In the blink of an eye, within a few months, within a few weeks, our lives changed. And that's a parable, or that's the reality of our lives. We might think that we have stability, and we might think that, I can predict what's going to be, but we don't. And so when we read in the Torah portion that it says today, it's today, like live today. Yes, you don't know what's going to be tomorrow, but don't live today like live, drink, and be merry, and who knows what's going to be tomorrow. Live today, because today matters. One of the things that I've certainly learned about why there's death in the world. So death in the world is a big subject, and it does come up again in this week's Torah portion. But I think the fact that we have a understanding that our lives are limited in this world, that the journey of the soul and body together, coupled together, is finite. That at some point in our lives, we don't know when, but at some point our soul and body will disengage from each other, and our soul will continue and our body will go into the ground, hopefully, and then there'll be a resurrection. There'll be a coming together of the body and soul. But the idea that our lives are temporary gives us passionate desire to live our lives today fully. So when it says today, it's not just today, like, okay, you better just jam in all the pleasurable activities that you can today. It's the flip side of that is choose today to live it meaningfully, to live it purposefully, to live it to be kind, to live it to do good things, to live it to call someone and tell them you love them, or cook somebody a meal, or whatever it is, but seize the moment, because we don't know what will be tomorrow. And we've certainly learnt that with Corona, that we don't know what will be next week. We don't know what will be next month. We don't know who's gonna stay healthy. We don't know where we'll be, the world will look like, etc., etc. And I think it can be a very empowering lesson. I think it's a very empowering lesson to know that our journey in this world is temporary and that it will end. So let's pack it in. let's use our free choice to make good choices. How do I make good choices? How do I know what to do? What's my moral compass? And again, we're talking free will in the moral sphere. So obviously, we're talking Torah, that our guidebook for how to live morally is the Torah. When it says, choose blessing over curse, fine, I'll choose blessing over curse. How do I do that? So look into the Torah, and the commandments, the mitzvot, are connectors. They're things that connect. They open up the pathways. They bring blessing into the world. When we act in God-like ways, when we are in partnership with God, when we do the will of God, when we line ourselves up, we bring blessing into the world. And again, that's exactly our mission in life, is to line ourselves up. So it's very interesting that in this week's Torah portion, there are a number of things that are commanded for us to do that previous to now were not commanded. So we get the commandment to eat meat. We can eat meat outside of the temple service. and you should enjoy the meat that you're going to consume, and it's not just the leftovers from the sacrifices, but meat. But if you're eating meat, it says again in this week's Torah passage, spill out the blood, because the blood is the source of the soul of the body of the animal. So don't eat the blood. Don't be bloodthirsty. Don't take into your body that which is a character trait that's bloodthirstiness. Don't do that. Like we want to stay kind. We want to stay good and loving, right? It also says in this week's Torah portion, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, referring especially, I mean, we've extrapolated out what that means in terms of not eating meat and milk together. But if you just take it the plain word meaning of the words that are in this week's Torah, don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. Don't do that. Why? Because it's not kind. It's not kind to take the mother and use the milk that's for nurturing and for love and for sustenance and for growth. Don't use that milk and cook its baby in that milk. Like, what a cruel thing if you actually think about it, what you're doing. And so to sensitize us, to give us a sense of what we're doing if we were to do that. And again, we've extrapolated it out into our world today to not eat meat and milk together, because what we're doing is we want to sensitize ourselves. We want ourselves, number one, to be kind people that are aware of the mother-child relationship, even if it's not people in the animal realm, but also that God is obligating us in something. So when we move from I'm doing this out of my own free will to I'm choosing to align myself with what God tells me is how I should be living our lives, I'm doing something even greater. It says it's better to be commanded to do something and do it than to choose from my own coming up with that on my own. Why? Because we have this Yetzer Hara, we have this knee-jerk reaction. When somebody tells us to do something, there's a knee-jerk reaction that I don't want to do it because I want to be independent. I want to be free to make my own decisions. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I mean, certainly I feel that way. Maybe you do too. I don't know. But there is certainly in teenagers, you tell them what to do. They don't want to hear what you want them to do. They want to decide for themselves what they want to do. But as an adult, as we grow older, there's another way to think about it. And this way to think about it is to say that there's something in me that's pushing back. There's a part of me that wants to be independent. There's a part of me that wants to make all the decisions. There's a part of me that's ego-driven. So if I recognize that this is something that God is commanding me to do, and I can minimize my ego, I can push down that part of me that kicks away and says, I don't want to be told what to do. I want to freely choose, because it's higher to freely choose. The Torah and God is telling us, no, it's actually a higher level for you to control yourself, for you to rise above that knee-jerk ego reaction of like, I get to choose, and to minimize that, not to negate yourself, but to recognize that there's something bigger than you in the universe, and that alignment is what's going to kind of make the blessings come into the world, and it's going to open everything up. So the commandment to do something and to do it because you're obliged to do something is a higher level than choosing to do it because it's not commanded. So in this Torah portion, we're commanded to do a couple of things, a few things, just as an example. And I mean, all of the commandments are in the Torah, but this particular one, not to eat a kid in its mother's milk, and the laws of which animals we can eat, which fish we can eat, etc., etc. They're not only there to sensitize us to be kind and to not drink the blood and spill the blood out onto the ground, and to not cook a kid in its mother's milk because that's cruel, and you don't want to be cruel, and not to eat animals that are carnivorous. We only eat herbivorous animals, and not to eat birds of prey because they are also carnivorous, etc., etc. And not to eat the fish that are slimy like the eels and the ones that are shellfish, etc. We're going to eat, the fish that eat plants, plant life, plankton, etc. We're going to eat those animals, those fish. But the idea, and again, I want to stress this idea because it's a fundamental Jewish idea, that it is a higher level for us to do that which is commanded versus to decide on our own to do something. And so on some level, God is giving us the gift of the commandments so that we can rise up above our egos. So again, in this week's Torah portion, when the first sentence, si, ra'eh, I present before you. So this word I, onochi, could be referring to God's giving you the choice of blessing and curse. Another way to understand that, say some of our commentators, is that the I is how do I, the individual who's reading this, how much stock do I place in my my ego, my sense of self? Like if it's all about me, then I'm arrogant and I'm not going to let God in. And if I'm so humble and minimal and I negate myself and I don't have a healthy sense of self, then I'm not going to have the energy to do things. So we need to have just the right amount of I to act and to be in control of ourselves. We have to have that amount of I. Not too much that we become arrogant and not too little that we don't do anything. So a sort of like, we get to choose how much our ego runs the roost, our inner life. So again, the idea of free choice, the idea of being able to make choices between our lower selves and our higher selves, between our animalistic drives and our desire for connection to transcendence and holiness, our desire to live a holy life. I'm pitted against forces that are coming at me, and at the point where they're equally pulling at me, that's my point of free will. That's the point of free will. If I'm not in a struggle, it's not my bechira point. It's not my free will point, right? So if I go into in England we have sweet shops, and I remember as a little girl going into the sweet shop to buy sweets, candy. And I would look at the candy and I say, well, you wouldn't, you struggle. I'm revealing my little childhood self, but like, would anybody know if I took one and I put it in my pocket? And at that point, there probably was a struggle there are people who struggle with this. Like, do I take the candy? Do I steal the candy from the candy shop, the sweet shop, or do I pay for it? Right? Like if you walk out of the supermarket and you didn't pay for something, do you go back in and pay for it? Like the examples all the time in our daily lives where we have a struggle between a higher calling, our higher selves, and our lower selves. Like, oh, I can't be bothered, or it doesn't really matter, or I find ways to justify why it doesn't really matter if I do something or I don't do something. And so we have that struggle. And the point where those forces are equally matched against each other, that's my point of free will. So then I get to choose. I get to choose. Who am I? Who is the I that's choosing? Says the mystics, it's my ratzon. It's my will. My will. And my will and what I want is who I am. And as I go through life, I move my point of free will. If I go into that sweet shop and I don't take the sweets, and I go into the sweet shop again, and I don't take the sweets, and I go into the sweet shop again, and I don't take the sweets, and I go in, let's say, however long it takes, where I don't think about it anymore, then that's not my bechira, that's not my free will point anymore. Now I've moved my bechira point, I moved my free will point up. So now it might be something else. There's something else that I struggle with, but I've captured that almost like a battlefield, right? If you think of it as a battlefield where you have opposing forces that are equally battling, and then this side wins out and pushes the battle line up. So now the battle's over here. You've now conquered this ground. You've moved yourself along, and that's the journey of life. The journey of life isn't to kill time. The journey of life is to win the struggles. Lovely Devar Torah last week from my son, who was speaking about this idea of that there's a Jewish saying, or maybe it's a non-Jewish saying, that we wish somebody that they should go from strength to strength. Right? You should be fortified, but the word is chayil, that you should go from chayil to chayil. So a chayil actually is a battle, is a soldier. So we're actually wishing each other that you should win the battles. Every point along the way, you should win the battles. You should be able, please God, to have the koyach, to have the strength to move and to conquer, so that you're moving yourself along and you're making more and more and more of the right decisions. And not that we don't make the right decisions always. We do make the wrong decisions, and we go back and we go forward, and we go back and we go forward. And that's the struggle of life. So the circumstances of our struggle many of which are not in our control, right? We're not in control of which families we're born into. We're not in control of who our parents are. We're not in control of who our children are. There's a lot that we're not in control of. We're not in control of our wealth. We're not in control of our health. There's a lot of things that we're not in control of, but we are in control of the decisions that we make and the thoughts that we have. I heard an amazing thing that the word in Hebrew for a thought is machshava, and the word in Hebrew for with joy, besimcha, with joy, are the same letters, which means that there's a connection between our thoughts and our joy, that we create the reality in our thoughts, and we can only have one thought at a time. So what thoughts am I going to have? How quickly our thoughts change, and are we in control of our thoughts? Who is happy? He who is happy with, he who is strong is the one who is happy with his lot. The one who is satisfied, the one who thinks that he has everything. I think I have everything. I heard a lovely story, I don't know where I saw it, about this woman. She's an old woman and her husband died and she's blind and she's a little decrepit. I don't know, she's in her 90s and she's being moved to a nursing home and she's can't see the room that she's going into, and her daughter leads her and is walking with a walker into this room, and the daughter says, "Mom, there's this and there's beautiful curtains and there's the dresser here," and she says, I love it, and she says, "Mom, but I haven't finished describing the room to you." She says, "I've chosen to love it. It doesn't matter to me exactly what's in this room. I've decided, I've made the decision to love it." Right? And you can understand that there would well be people who would say, like, it's no good and it's not good enough, and or you choose to say, I love it. I'm going to live with the love it. And I think that's a very powerful lesson that we all have. Are we able to look at what we have and say, I love it? You know, in the morning blessings that are written in our liturgy, to say one of the first blessings that we say in the morning is that you, who are the source of all blessing, God, King of the universe, you know, you're immanent, you're here, we're talking to you in the first person, and then you're transcendent and you're the King of the universe, and you give the heart understanding to distinguish, that's an interesting translation, to distinguish day from night. It's actually also translated that you give the rooster the ability to choose between day and night. So the rooster crows when it's morning. When the morning's coming, the rooster crows. But the idea is that God's giving us the capacity to know the difference between good and bad, between right and wrong, between light and dark. We have it, and it's in us. You know, we have this beautiful medrash that talks about our in utero. We're taught the whole Torah. We're taught all the wisdom of the world. It's in us. It's in us. And we have the lifetime to bring it out. We have the lifetime to bring it out. How do we bring it out? We bring it out by learning Torah, but we also bring it out by how we act and what we do, and it resonates as the right thing to do. Like, it feels right when you do certain things. It might be hard to do, and it might be battling the forces against doing it, but when you've done it and you've moved your free will point, you've conquered that land, you've moved the battlefield up, there's a joy there. This week's Torah portion, 7 times more than any other Torah portion, uses the word besimcha, joy. What's joy? And our Torah is telling us that true joy, besimcha, as I just mentioned, is in our thoughts. True joy, it's always in this week's Torah portion, when the word joy is used, it's always lifnei Hashem. It's always with God in the equation. That to have true joy is to have godliness, is to be connected to the source of everything. So we can be going through really tough struggles. We can be at that battle point and we can be raging. But if we believe or know or see, ra'eh, that we're in a battle for a reason, there's meaning, there's an opportunity to grow, there's an opportunity for my soul to rise to its higher self and to express itself. And yes, it might be extremely, excruciatingly painful experience that I'm going through, and there's meaning in it. Then there's some joy. It's almost like in a gym where if you were to walk in a gym and not know what a gym is, and you see people sweating and you see them grunting and and it looks like it's so painful, but there's a purpose for it. They're doing it for a reason, and they want to look strong or whatever. But the mindset is, I'm growing. I'm pushing myself. There's a lovely saying that your neshama knows that it's here to grow and to develop. And there's pleasure in discovering and building yourself. So we could be going through the proverbial lifting the weights in the gym in our struggles of life. And I'm not minimizing the struggles of life. And we all have them. And we're all battling them. And we should have the koyach, the strength to win, to learn, to grow, to be, to whatever we're going to learn from that, and then be fortified and be resilient and be more compassionate and be more understanding and be more whatever it is that is there to teach us. But in the struggle, there's some capacity to feel the blessing. Again, many of you know that I lost a child, and now I'm 30 years later, and I look back and I think I was so blessed to have suffered that. And at the time, there was no way that I would say that suffering was I would definitely not wish it on anybody. I would definitely not wish it on myself. But having gone through it and looked back on it and seeing what I learned from it, I learned so much that I feel blessed to have suffered. Okay, so I don't know what you're going to all do about that. But I think it fits into the context of finding true simcha in this world, to find true joy. So lifnei Hashem, joy is when we're connecting ourselves to God, however we do that. So many times in this week's Torah portion, the joy that we are asked to experience, or that we know is there to experience, is linked to the holidays. And again, at the end of this week's Torah portion, we are reading about the 3 pilgrim holidays where we travel to Jerusalem and we go lifnei Hashem. We're going to be there. We're going to join with God, and it's the most joyous of events because there's connection to the transcendent. So there's lifnei Hashem, and there's also the sharing that we do with other people. B'simcha is plural. We're doing it together. We're sharing. When we bring our sacrifices and we go into the temple, we bring our sacrifices. We don't eat them alone. We share them. We give them to all people. Everybody's sharing them. Everybody's eating. We're all together, and we don't forget anyone. We're a society in its ideal where we don't leave anyone behind. It says that hold on, let me just read this. That if there should be a destitute person among you, and again, we didn't have destitute people in the desert. We're going into Israel. Moses is saying, don't let look out for the destitute people. Any of your brethren in any of your cities in the land that Hashem your God gives you, you shall not harden your heart or close your hand against your destitute brother. Rather, you shall open your hand to him. You shall lend him his requirement, whatever is lacking to him. Beware lest there be lawless thought in your heart, saying, etc., etc. And it goes on to say that you should just continue. Don't forget to give and give with an open heart. It's not enough. And it's so interesting because this mitzvah of tzedakah, of sharing, of giving of our wealth, of distributing it, right? The word tzedakah is justice. It's not charity in the sense that I've got this and I'm now giving it to you and I pity you. The Jewish understanding of tzedakah is that it's righteousness, justice. I have the money, but it's not mine. It's God gave it to me. Why? So I can share it with you. I get to be the conduit to share. It's not mine. I don't have anything. I don't own anything. I have a semblance of owning anything, but at the end of the day, I don't own anything. So share it. And God's saying there you'll find joy. You'll find joy when not only when you do it with God, but you have to do it with everybody. The destitute, the widow, it delineates all the people, the manservants, the slaves, the manservants, the maidservants, the Levites, the strangers, the converts, the fatherless, the orphans, the widows. All of these people, don't leave them behind. You can't have a party and enjoy that and really enjoy that b'simcha when there's all this poverty and all this destituteness, if that's a word. So we are enjoined to share besimcha, then you will be besimcha. Then you can have that true joy. Then you can truly feel that gladness and that happiness and that pleasure and the delight. So it's not live, drink, and be merry just in the moment of enjoying a moment. It's a connection, that connection that our soul has with the transcendent. That's where joy is. These joyous moments. I remember my father saying at our wedding, saying, like, this is a memory moment. And I remember him saying to the people that came to the wedding, we wouldn't be able to have a simcha, and we wouldn't be able to have this simcha if you weren't here. And it's interesting because we're in COVID days where our simchas, our weddings and our bar mitzvahs are small, and they're not, the big extravagant, how many hundreds of people are coming to weddings and celebrating together. We're not able to do that today. I don't know what that's about. But there is definitely a concept of a simcha requiring the people, and requiring sharing, and requiring God in it. Like, it's all, that's the package deal. That's where happiness, that's where simcha resides, is where we have it lifnei Hashem, where we're connecting ourselves to God through the festivals, through the mitzvot, through the commandments, through the connectors, through being godlike, through being commanded, being obliged to do it, rising above our lower self, rising above that ego that doesn't want to do it because I don't want to be commanded. Like, rise above that is really hard. And move your free will point. Keep moving it on. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep understanding that who we are, says the Torah, is our will. You are your ratzon. You are what you want. You are what you want. I think you have to kind of like really sit with that for a long time to really understand what that is. What do I want? What do I want for myself? What do I want for my loved ones? What do I want for my, what do I want for the world? That if you keep going back, that the bedrock of who we are is what we want. And we can get to move that. We get to create what it is that we want. We get to move it in our lifetime. And what's truly amazing is here we are. We're coming up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is that God gives us the gift of teshuvah, of returning, of saying, I'm going to wipe it all. If you have the right intention, if you have the right thoughts, if you really want to start all over again, if you really want, you can create yourself. You can create. I'm giving you, says God, the capacity to create yourself. It's an incredible gift. We're not locked in. We might be locked into our circumstances, but we're not locked in to how we think and the decisions we make. And that's where free will resides. And we can move that free will point along. So even in this first sentence where it says, see, I set before you today a blessing and a curse, there's this sense of I. Where's the ego? Like, I get to choose how much of my ego I feed and how much of my ego, like, to get that correct balance of I. We get to choose how we view today. Is today an opportunity to seize and do good? Or is today just, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be here forever, so I might as well just do whatever? Like, how do I use my day now? What do I do? How do I think about today? Am I seizing the moment to do those things? It says you shouldn't let something get cold. We learned this around Passover time, where it says, you have to stop baking the matzah at a certain point, because if you let it sit for too long, it rises, it gets all puffy, and it gets arrogant, and it becomes bread. So don't let it rise. You gotta get it before it gets to that point. So same with our lives. Like, if something comes your way to do it, don't say, I'll get to it next week. How easy it is to say, maybe next week I'll do it. Do it now. You never know if there's going to be a next week. And even more so now, we don't know what's going to be next month. So do it now. Seize the moment. Today. It says in this week's Torah portion, today. Do it today. And we get to choose what we see. Re'eh. What do we see? How much do we know? How much do we rely on where we came from? What our ancestors knew and what they're teaching us and what they've handed on to us and what we're handing on. Like, how much do we know that God exists in the world, and how much do we see with our minds? And when we say Shema, we cover our eyes because the outside world is so deceptive. What do we hear? What do we know? What do our senses teach us? Can we go inside and access that soul that God's breathing into us and go to the truth of things and understand, that there's a higher life to live than the physical life that we're living, which is all part of this bigger, like, we're together. There's a great story, I think it's in the Talmud, that speaks about a king who had an orchard. So in the orchard, he had a lot of fruit trees, and he didn't want anyone to steal his fruit trees. Steal the fruit off his fruit trees. So he hires a lame man and he hires a blind man, because he figures, the lame man can't steal and the blind man can't steal. So what happens is these two watchmen, one's lame and one is blind, and the lame man gets onto the shoulders of the blind man, and together they steal the fruit in the orchard. And then when the king finds out, he says, well, how is that, and they say, well, you can't punish us because I'm lame and he's blind. But together they were able to achieve the stealing of the fruit in the orchard. So too, we are a body and a soul. And we have the capacity to use the body and soul for good, to guard the orchard, to make sure that the immoral things don't happen, to make sure that we live a moral life, to make sure that we resist the temptations of stealing, so to speak, the proverbial stealing. Or we can use our body and soul together to destroy ourselves, to steal, and to etc., etc. And that's what Moses is telling the Jewish people. It's set before you. Choose. You get to choose. Is your body and soul combination, are you, the blind and the lame man, together going to live your higher lives, your higher soul, your higher calling? Can you, the soul, pull the body up? Bring the body with you. Use the body for good. Use the body to make the challah that you're going to share. Use your body to shop for other people. Use your body to call your neighbor and ask them how they're doing. I don't know, whatever it is. We all can do that. We can all keep sharing. And it talks about sharing. It talks about sharing our wealth, sharing with our destitute neighbor. Don't leave your destitute neighbor, etc., etc. It's a fantastic Torah portion. So not only does it say to share with your neighbor and to make sure, but it says you have to do it kindly, right? It's one of the only mitzvahs in the Torah where we're told that you have to do it with the right intention, right? So I could light Shabbos candles. I've lit Shabbos candles. I've lit the candles, but where my mind might be a little off. I might be thinking about lots of other things, but I've still lit the Shabbos candles with this injunction to share our wealth, to give tzedakah. We're also told to not be unkind, to put yourself in the place of the other person, to be kind to them. And I remember, sometimes there are people knock on the door in the old days before COVID, people knock on the door and ask for money. And I remember my knee-jerk reaction was to not always be so kind. Like, give them money, perhaps. But I remember one Rabbi Lapin, who lives here in town in Providence, he said, sometimes you don't have the money to give. I mean, if you give them a couple of dollars, whatever, you can give them something. Give them a blessing. Give them a blessing. You're still giving them something. You're giving them a sense that they matter, and that you see them, that you might not be able to give them the money, and that might be what they want, but you can give them caring and love and a bracha. Like, I bless you that you should be successful, that your woes should go away, whatever it is. Like, don't minimize the gift of blessing someone and seeing them. I see that you're suffering, and I bless that you shouldn't be suffering. That's a very powerful thing. And I remember doing that, and it sort of shifted my whole thinking, because I felt a little begrudged when people knock on the door and ask for money, but I didn't want to feel that way. And then this was a good way to kind of feel like I'm still giving, like the desire to give. Okay, so open your hand. It says to open your hand and give kindly. If you're going to give, don't give begrudgingly. Give with a smile. Give with a bracha, with a blessing. So take care of the person that's coming to you, and recognize that they're also B'Tselem Elokim. They're also in the image of God. They also have a soul. To see the soul of the other person, not just the body of the other person. So I think that's great lessons. So we again are stewards of the wealth that we have. We get to own it, so to speak, while we're living in this world. Like, this is my house. I live in this house. But at the end of the day, it's not my house, right? And at the end of the day, we don't take anything with us. We take what we've given away. Isn't that a crazy paradox? That at the end of the day, we take with us into the next world that which we have given away. Okay. So this idea of simcha, lifnei Hashem, always including God, including other people, making it an inclusionary, joyous act of when we are in our Jewish holidays, when we are with God, like open up the home, invite other people in, share with other people, and then there's true simcha. And every single time in this week's Torah portion where simcha is juxtaposed with God and juxtaposed with opening your hand and sharing with other people. So it's so beautiful. It's like really a communal, social, national, and actually going back to the beginning, this week's Torah portion with the first sentence where it says, that Ra'eh, that individually, singularly you should see, but then you're part of the bigger whole. So again, this message that comes out of this week's Torah portion is that we're individuals and we're part of a collective, and we're integrated into that collective, and we're separate from the collective. We have to work on ourselves. Nobody else is going to work on ourselves for us. We have to work on ourselves. We have to birth ourselves into the next world. We have to work to keep moving our free will point, conquering the land, moving ourselves into higher and higher places. We have to keep doing that as best as we can, keep doing that because we're creating ourselves. But along the way, what we're doing is we're bringing blessing to everybody, to the whole world, to all of creation, and that we're part of that collective. So it goes from singular to plural in this sentence to indicate that you're a singular, that you matter, that the whole world is in the balance. And we learn this on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The whole world's in balance, and what you do matters. You're gonna move the scales one way or the other. It's like a huge responsibility, and the whole world depends on you, and we're part of this collective, and we benefit from what other people do. So if other people are digging a hole under their seat in the boat, we're all going to go down. So let's try to lift each other up. Let's try to encourage each other to act and be good also. Okay, so we get to choose our combination of our perception of our own ego. We get to choose how we view today. We get to choose what we see and what we think, and how we like what our thoughts are. We get to choose that. And then again we get to make these choices, and that's our ratzon. That's who we are at our deepest level, is who we are. It's the choices that we make. So when we enter into the land, Moses is telling the people, you get to choose. And when you go into the land, one of the things you have to be totally, unbelievably prioritize is get rid of idolatry. Idolatry and worshipping other gods is fundamentally a no for us, the Jewish people, for all the world, actually. Everybody's supposed to recognize the one God, and that we're the ambassadors. We're the Segula. It's in this week's Torah portion. We're the treasured people, the treasured nation. We're this nation that represents that monotheistic lesson, bringing it into the world and living it to its highest level. Hopefully, we can live that level. Please, God, we do that. But that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to destroy the idolatries that's in the land. Where you're going into the land of Israel, it's going to destroy the idolatry that's there. You're going to destroy the altars, and you're going to destroy everything that represents idolatry, because the way in which we serve God is different than the pagan people living in the land who were idolaters. So you're going to destroy all their temples. You're going to destroy all their idols, etc., and all their altars. Destroy all that, because there's going to be one altar, there's going to be one temple, and it's going to be in the place where God will show you. And it doesn't say the name of the place. It keeps saying over and over again, the place that I will show you, the place of my choosing. It's very round the side. It never mentions Jerusalem. It says from the place that I will choose. But one of the commentators I heard, I can't remember who it was, suggests that the other way to understand that, because it's not written there, is that a fundamental axiom of who we are as Jews is to search out God, to look for God wherever he may be found. And there's the saying, and I can't remember where it came from, is where is God? Wherever you let him in. That we have a capacity to recognize God and search for God and yearn for God. And yes, it's in Jerusalem, because there's greater spirituality in Jerusalem, and there's greater concentration of holiness and godliness, and it's where heaven and earth kiss at that point where the temple's built over there. And we can also access God inside of ourselves, around us. Wherever we are, we can access God. And that's truly, truly fundamentally important, especially in this day where we don't have our synagogues to go to anymore, and we don't have, can't get on an airplane and just go to Jerusalem and be there, for whatever we want to be there for. We can't do that. Maybe we never could do that, but whatever. It's accessible. Now it's not. The airport's shut. We can't go there. But it doesn't matter on some level, because God is accessible where we are. We get to choose to search for God. Are we going to put up our spiritual antenna? Are we going to see God around us? Are we going to look for God? Are we going to listen for God? Are we going to hear God? Are we going to quieten ourselves down? Are we going to look for God? And can we find God here, right here where we are? Wherever we let God in is where God is. And we know that God is, from the Uncle Moshe, God is here, God is there, God is everywhere, up, down, all around, everywhere. Yeah, we exist within the oneness of God. God is the makom. God is the world. God is everywhere, and we're part of that. So yes, we can access God perhaps more tangibly, perhaps in the land. There's more spirituality in the land. The eyes of God are on the land from morning till night, all day, every day, all the time. So we are a people that's linked to the holiness of the land, a holy people in a holy land. But if we are holy people and we're not in the land, we still have access to God wherever we are. And each one of us has access. We don't have to do it through an intermediate. We can do it ourselves. Each one of us can pick up the phone, so to speak, and talk to God, because God's listening to us all the time. And it's so interesting. One of the sayings I heard, it says it's easy to speak to God in tears. Like when we're suffering, we call out to God, help me. There's no atheists in a foxhole. But it's also hard to serve God in joy. And that's what Moses is warning the people. When you go into the land, and you'll be wealthy, and you will take care of your destitute fellow brothers. They're called brothers over and over and again. They're not just other people. They're your brothers. They're you. There, by the grace of God, go you. Share the wealth that God has given you as a gift to distribute to others, so you can have joy with all people, with all the people. But that joy is sometimes hard when we feel that we are buttressed against the vagaries of life. We have our homes, right? So on Sukkot we go out of our homes to try to recreate that idea that we are, everything we have is a gift. To get in touch with that message, because the wealth and the affluence can prevent us from connection to God and to others, right? We're so worried about I don't know, but it might be easy to speak to God in tears, but it's also hard to serve God in joy, and those are two extremes, and somewhere in between. It's also our choice to choose to look for God, and to choose to make the right decisions, and to move our point of free will along the path. We're taught in this week's Torah portion about, let's see what I did not cover. I think I covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover, actually. I wanted to cover the whole idea of free will, this ability to choose our morality. Rabbi Sachs, beautiful quote from Rabbi Sachs: a moral society is strong when it cares for the weak. It's rich when it cares for the poor, and invulnerable when it cares for the vulnerable. Isn't that great? A moral society is strong when it cares for the weak, rich when it cares for the poor, and invulnerable when it cares for the vulnerable. And God's saying, and Moses is saying to the people, when you go into the land and you have wealth, and God is blessing you with abundance, don't forget God. Don't forget each other. Don't lose track of where you came from. Look for God. See God today. Share your wealth. Be happy. Besimcha with your lot. Right? Your simcha, again, your simcha is your machshava, is your thought. Same word, same letters. So how you think. The old lady goes into her little room in the nursing home and says, I love it. She can't see it. Doesn't matter. She loves it. She wants to love it. She needs to love it. Her thoughts love it. How do we see the world around us? Are we looking with which lenses are we looking at our world? Are we looking with a lens of gratitude? Are we looking with a lens of upsettedness and grumpiness? Yes, sometimes no. But maybe to like think about that and see what I'm in control of, because the I is what I'm working on in these days, and I can't control a lot, but I can control that. So finally, there's one more thing I just wanted to mention, which is also in this week's Torah portion, where it says, you are children to Hashem your God, right? We're children to God. You shall not cut yourselves, and you shall not make a bald spot between your eyes for a dead person. So again, death isn't the end. You might think that when a person dies, they're gone forever, their body's gone, so what, like you can deface your body. No, says God, don't do that. And it continues to say, for you are a holy people, and God has chosen you to be a treasured people from among all the people on the face of the earth. So don't do that, because your body, your body is sacred also. Your body is a vessel for the soul. And together, like the lame man and the blind man, you can do a lot. You can damage and you can create. You can choose death or you can choose life. You can choose curse. You can choose blessing. That combination of body and soul has so much potential. Use it well. Don't cut it, and don't be led into thinking that this is all that there is. It's really a lesson in teaching us that this world is just, again, like chayil to chayil. We go from strength to strength. We go from battle to battle. We're on that cusp of where our choices are made, where there's equal pull either way between in a moral sphere, not what ice cream I eat, but what moral choices I make. And I want to take hold of myself. I want to be strong. I want to be in control of myself so that I can make good choices, so that I can pull myself along, so that I can bring blessing into the world, so that I can continue to feel the connection to God, and it will feed off itself. Blessing, like mitzvah brings on another mitzvah. If I go in that way, if I keep doing that, I'm going to move myself along, and I'm going to move the whole world along. It's like the guy that's drilling the hole under his seat, but we're patching up the seat, and we're throwing the water overboard, and the boat's still floating, and we're part of that, because what we do matters. Ra'eh in the singular, it matters what each one of us does, and it matters what each one of us thinks, and it matters what each one of us says, and it's a huge responsibility, and yet it's very empowering, and it's very joyous making, in the ultimate sense of joy, the joy of connection to the transcendent, the joy of knowing that our life is meaningful, and the joy of knowing that I'm part of this, something bigger than me. And that's where joy is. Let's see if I have any more good phrases to end with. The one is from the Chazon Ish, who was a Torah scholar during the Second World War, who had a lot of suffering, and he said, "For one who knows the light of truth, there is no sadness in the world." And it's a huge thing to say, there's no sadness in the world. Of course there's sadness in the world, but if you see sadness as a picture, as a fleetingness, that the sadness is there, but there's light. If we know the light of truth, then there's no sadness in the world, says the Chazon Ish. So real happiness is what you experience when you are doing what you should be doing, creating yourself. The journey doesn't cause the happiness. It is the happiness. It's building. We're building ourselves. And we can go through a lot of troubles and pain and suffering and struggles. And I think we can. Obviously we can. We're very resilient beings when we know that we're building something, that the work, that everything has a purpose and a meaning. That even though life is temporary, this life is temporary, this combination of body and soul is temporary, the result is eternal. That's the final message. The result is eternal, and we get to be part of that eternity. So that's give us a bracha that we should be aware of the choices that we make, be mindful of them, and try really hard to hold on to them and make those good choices and keep moving our free will point up the proverbial ladder. Wish you all a good week.